Before the Levites gained their independence, the island was ruled by the French and Spanish. The French occupying the west Saint Dominique and the Spanish the eastern two-thirds, Santo Domingo. In 1804, the Levites gained their independence, renaming the territory Haiti or Haiti. Haiti was France's most profitable colony as a result of the sugar plantations worked by slaves. As a result of the independence, the price of sugar became a very expensive commodity for France. Meanwhile, on the eastern Spanish side were mostly Spanish descendants, mulattoes, which were Spanish and slave families mixed, freedmen, and still some black slaves. The land there was stagnant and was used mostly for farming and livestock raising. Most of the Spanish attention went to Mexico to mine for gold. At that point, most of the Spanish under Christopher Columbus had already left because they had realized there was not as much gold as they thought on the island. So after damn near decimating the entire population of the Taino Indians and Simeonites on the island, they lost interest, and most of them left to other islands in search for more riches and gold, and left behind a small population of Spanish. Now, there was a huge population difference by that point. The Spanish colony's population as around 80,000. Haiti, on the other hand, was nearing 1 million former slaves. On November 9th, 1821, the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo was toppled by a group led by Núñez de Cáceres, the colony's former administrator. They proclaimed independence from Spain on November 30th, 1821. The new nation was known as the Republic of Spanish Haiti. On December 1st, 1821, a constitutive act was ordered to petition the union of Spanish Haiti with Gran Colombia. Gran Colombia was a short-lived republic including the territories of present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, northern Peru, western Guyana, and northwest Brazil. Now, at that time, the French president was Jean-Pierre Boyer, and he was now with the idea of Spanish Haiti uniting with Gran Colombia. His objective was to maintain Haitian independence against potential French or Spanish attack or reconquest, to maintain the freedom of his former slaves, and to liberate the remaining slaves in Spanish Haiti. Boyer was already in negotiations with France to prevent an attack by 14 French warships stationed near Port-au-Prince, which is the Haitian capital. Now, after Levi gained their independence, about 20 years later, the French came back and circled the island of Haiti with warships. The French threatened to attack Haiti and to re-enslave the Levites, unless they paid them something called the independence debt. Now, the independence debt was by the French said to repay them for their loss of property and their loss of land. And what they meant by that is their loss of slaves and their loss of the fortune that they would have made if slavery was kept intact. So the people of the island of Haiti were forced to repay the French for their liberation and for their independence 150 million francs over the span of 5 years, which is today's money that would account to almost $22 billion, which is impossible. And by the way, during that time, when Haiti gained its independence, the French had sold the United States what's called the Louisiana Purchase. And that's the whole Louisiana territory, including New Orleans, that whole territory in that area. That territory is twice as big as Haiti, but they charge the United States half of the debt that they charge to France. And you'll never learn about this in history class. Also, that cheap purchase the United States made from the French was a direct result of the Levites kicking the French asses and sending them back home. Because under that time, the French were under the orders of Napoleon Bonaparte. And he was trying to reclaim a lot of the territory that was lost in what was going on at the same time, called the 7-Year War. In order to expedite that war, he needed funding. And that funding could only come by reinstituting slavery in Haiti. So when he attempted to do that, he got his ass kicked up and down the island by, at that time, a man by the name of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, which was the right-hand man of Toussaint Louverture. By that time, Toussaint was either dead or he was in prison. I'm not sure if he died by that point, but Napoleon locked him up in prison in a dungeon to die. But Napoleon was so messed up over this loss of Haiti that he did not have the funds and he did not have the energy to go and reclaim his territory. So he just said F it, and he sold the Louisiana Purchase to the United States for at a fire sale price. But once again, you'll never hear about this in history class. Now, during the reign of this Haitian president, Boyer, Jean-Pierre Boyer, he promised protection to several of the Dominican governors, securing their allegiance to Haiti. And after that, Boyer invaded with a force of 10,000 soldiers in February 1822 into Spanish Haiti, encountering little opposition. By that time, the Spanish were small in numbers in comparison to the Haitians. Their economy was weak. And the Haitians, they were still hardened and battle ready from the French-Haitian wars. And their determination to conquer was still fiery. So on February 9th, 1822, Boyer formally entered the capital city, Santo Domingo, and he was met by the president of Santo Domingo then, which was Nunez de Cáceres, and Boyer was given the keys to the palace. At that point, he basically owned the whole island of Hispaniola. And his goal was to unite the island into sort of a one world order under him. But his thought was to do this to protect the island from slavery being reinstituted by Esau. Now, since all of Hispaniola was under Haitian rule, they had to follow the Haitian constitution. According to Haiti's constitution, Edomites could not own land. So all the major land-owning families were forced to leave their properties. Most of them immigrated to Cuba and to Puerto Rico. At that time, those two islands were Spanish possessions. A lot of them also went to Gran Colombia. Now the Haitians, or the Levites, who associated the Roman Catholic Church with the French slave masters who had exploited them before the independence, confiscated all church property, deported all foreign clergy, and severed the ties of the remaining clergy to the Vatican. The Haitians were into voodoo, and they believe voodoo is what delivered them out of the hands of the French. So they're going off on that point, and is the main reason why they're in the condition that they're in today. Now, Haiti was in debt to France for 150 million francs because of their agreement to prevent the French attacking Haiti once again. So in order to pay off this huge debt, the Haitians put a harsh tax on the Simeonites on the island. And since the Haitians, or the Levites, since they were unable to adequately provide provisions for his army, the Haitian army that were occupying the regions in the Dominican Republic, they had to survive by commandeering or confiscating food from Simeon, and most of the times at gunpoint. Now, attempts to redistribute the land conflicted with the system that was put in place at that time. The system at that time that was put in place was called communal land tenure or tenure. Now, this had arisen from the ranching economy. Now, what this means is that, as I mentioned earlier, that section of the island where the Spanish dwelt and the Simeonites dwelt, that section was left mostly to farming and to agriculture and to raising livestock. So what happened was that under the Spanish rule, and since there were so few of them, the slaves there, or the Simeonite slaves that were there, and a lot of them were Judah Benjamin Levi from the west coast of Africa, and also Levites that crossed over into Dominican Republic that were slaves there. They had a different relationship with the slave owners. The relationship there was a lot more equal than it was on the Haitian side, the sugar plantation side, because they needed the slaves to also be ranchers. So you had a lot of slaves that were riding horses. You had a lot of slaves that had machetes. You had most of the slaves there had very close relations to their slave owners just because of the nature of the environment there. So they had a type of system there where everybody shared the land. So really, the slaves there, they did not have to grow crops for their survival because the owners did that. The owners were the rich ones or slave masters, and they just worked for the for their slave owners. So naturally, they got food and they got taken care of pretty well on that side of the island. So when Boyer invaded and took over this territory of Spanish Haiti, he enforced his own laws. He enforced something that was called a Boyer's Code Rural. Now, under this law, they had to grow what's called cash crops. So in other words, the slaves, in order to survive, they had to be their own businessmen. And this hurt them a lot. Even though the invasion pretty much did eliminate colonial slavery, it put the slaves there at hardship. And also what it did is, through his laws, he was trying to convert the Simeonites into second-class citizens. So the Simeonites, they had restrictions of movements. There are certain places they couldn't go. They were prohibited to run for public office. They had night curfews. They couldn't travel in groups. They couldn't form organizations. So what this did is this led to a creation of movements to advocate separation from Haiti. In 1838, Juan Pablo Duarte, Ramon Matias Mella, and Francisco del Rosio Sanchez, they founded a secret society called La Trinitaria, or the Trinity, to win independence from Haiti. In 1843, they allied with the Haitian movement, and they overthrew Boyer. After they revealed themselves as revolutionaries working for Dominican independence, the new Haitian president, which came up after Boyer, Charles Riviere Herod, he exiled and imprisoned the leading Trinitarios. Now, at the same time this was going on, you had an exporter by the name of Buenaventura Baez. He was a mahogany exporter, and he was a deputy in the Haitian National Assembly. And at the same time, he was negotiating with the French consul for establishment of a French protectorate. So in other words, he wanted to be a protected state under the French. He wanted Haiti to be a protected state under the French to secure their independence and to secure the fact that they would remain safe and not be invaded. So in an uprising timed to preempt Baez, on February 27th, 1844, the Trinitarios declared independence from Haiti. So there was a leftover sect of this secret society. In the secret, they went back into the dark and they were working in the dark. They were financed or backed by a man by the name of Pedro Santana, and he was a wealthy cattle rancher from a section in Dominican Republic. He also had a private army of peons who worked on his estates. This marked the beginning of the Dominican War of Independence. Now, the Simeon won the Dominican War of Independence, and it gave the Dominican Republic independence from Haiti in 1844. And this struggle between the Levites after invading after invading Dominican Republic, and the way they treated the Dominicans, imposing a heavy tax, treating them as second-class citizens, this is what really forged the hatred between Simeon and Levi. So Simeon declared war against Levi, and they gained their independence in 1844. And that Trinity, they are that secret society. They're the ones who designed the flag that is now used to represent the Dominican Republic.